Moving on, U.S. Navy is repositioning its forces amid the ongoing conflict in West Asia. The USS George Washington has arrived in the Arabian Sea, replacing the USS Abraham Lincoln, which is heading home after more than 250 days at sea. The USS Gerald R. Ford also left the region earlier this year, with 2 U.S. warships withdrawn and a new one deployed to West Asia. Questions are now being raised over whether the U.S. Navy is facing a strategic setback in the region. Now, according to U.S. Central Command, the George Washington's arrival is part of a scheduled deployment. Its arrival comes after growing concerns over the conditions aboard the Lincoln, which has been at sea for an unusually long period. With the Lincoln now headed home, the U.S. will be left without an aircraft carrier in the Western Pacific. The move comes even as Washington continues to describe the Indo-Pacific as a major strategic priority. The Lincoln spent longer at sea without a port visit than any U.S. Navy aircraft carrier before it. The long deployment has also brought growing concerns over life on board. Reports have described shortages of food and hygiene supplies, as well as maintenance problems caused by the extended time at sea. Now, the pressure has not been limited to the ship itself. Families of some roughly 5,000 sailors and Marines aboard, they have spoken about the mental toll of the mission. Adding to the concerns was the USS Gerald R. Ford, also leaving the region earlier this year. Now, this has prompted questions over whether the U.S. Navy is reducing its presence in West Asia. At the same time, Washington remains focused on keeping the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz open. The waterway is vital to global trade and has remained a key point of tension with Iran. Although fighting has recently paused, Iran has continued to assert its influence over the strait. The latest naval movement comes as the United States increases economic pressure on Iran, tightening economic sanctions. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent echoed Trump's warning and urged China to join the campaign. He warned that the U.S. will target countries and companies that continue to buy Iranian oil, transfer money, or conduct businesses with Tehran. Listen to this.
We are confident that everyone wants the Strait reopened and for energy prices to come back down. And sir, keep in mind that the Chinese get 50%, 50, the other energy from the Gulf. So it would do them a big service to get with the program.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi rejected the U.S. threats, calling the campaign economic terrorism. He accused the U.S. of threatening the global economy and using its economic pressure campaign to divert attention from rising U.S. debt and interest costs. We're now being joined by Joachim Bitterlich from Paris. He's a former European diplomatic and security advisor to German Chancellor Helmut Kohl and former German ambassador to NATO. Thank you so much, Mr. Bitterlich, for joining us on the broadcast. Now, with 2 U.S. warships withdrawn and a new one deployed to West Asia, do you think the U.S. Navy is perhaps facing a setback in the region, in your opinion?
It's a political setback, if you want, because the Americans have understood military, they have not got the Iran where they wanted to get the Iranians. It's a real failure of the US insofar. And if you look at this, please understand the Americans have been trying, seduced by Israel at the end of the day, to get a regime change in Iran, in Tehran. No success. And the Iranians have discovered the Strait of Hormuz. And therefore, militarily, finally, it's impossible, let's say, to overcome that situation. Therefore, the Americans stick to economic sanctions. And under these conditions, well, you may reduce your naval forces. By the way, it was necessary, you have indicated this, the Lincoln had to be withdrawn due, let's say, to real human and material reasons and replaced. And therefore, well, it's no more the first goal to press military on Iran. The goal is economic. And you have heard Secretary Bessent talking about this. You have heard that the Chinese have countered, rejected the American attempts, and they have been asking for taking back negotiations. And Donald Trump is under pressure at home because it was a, let's say, a conflict without winning the story, and therefore, due to the elections in November. Please, Trump is under pressure, and Trump, let's say, has to show results, but he's not able to show up till now any real positive result. And this is the situation.
Right, Mr. Bitterlich, but having said that, we know that Iran has turned the Strait of Hormuz into its biggest source of leverage here, and Washington wants the Strait reopened, but Iran says that it will not restore normal passage unless the U.S. meets its conditions. And do you think that Iran is deliberately using Hormuz to not simply exert pressure militarily, but also an economic weapon to counter the economic pressure that U.S. is also trying to exert on Tehran, and it's forcing the U.S. to confront the global consequences of this prolonged war?
But it's, if you want, use the Strait of Hormuz as economic weapon by the US. It's, let's say, it's in the hand of the Iranians. The Iranians control the Strait of Hormuz at the end of the day. And therefore, they influence the economy in the whole of Asia, especially. Look at India, look at China, look at Japan, look at others. And therefore, what's important now is the Strait of Hormuz in the hands of the Iranians is a sort, let's call ersatz of a nuclear weapon at the end of the day. And the Americans seem helpless towards this. And they are condemned now to negotiate with Iran through the Pakistanis, through others, to come down with this conflict. It's the only way.
And Mr. Bitterlich, we can't also ignore the reports of deteriorating morale and difficult conditions aboard the Lincoln, amid concerns over the extraordinary length of its deployment and concerns that Pentagon has rejected. How significant is then while we're assessing the U.S. Navy's ability to sustain this prolonged campaign? Because we understand that President Trump only thought that it's going to be a matter of a few weeks, but now we're 6 months in.
Well, underestimating, let's say, the Iranian power at the end of the day. The Americans have been thinking it's a matter of, let's say, 1 week, perhaps 2 weeks, to get a regime change in Tehran. They've missed the story totally, because they've totally underestimated the value of the Strait of Hormuz on the Iranian side. And please, therefore, neither the Chinese, nor the Indians, nor others may support the Americans insofar. The Americans are alone at the end of the day. And therefore, they are condemned just to negotiate. But Trump doesn't want to show this weakness ahead of the midterm elections in the US. This is the situation where we are. And please, a ship 250 days in permanent use, it's not normal at all. And therefore, the Americans had, let's say, to take the consequences on this.
Right, and Mr. Bitterlich, you mentioned that now U.S. is trying to use economic sanctions as a way to get out of it. But if Washington is now responding to Iran's refusal to open the Strait of Hormuz with greater economic sanctions, the greatest sanctions that have ever been imposed on Iran, do you think that could also risk escalating the conflict here rather than Iran bowing down to this pressure, as we've seen, in the course of this war? Because Iran is not willing to back down, and it has met the United States' aggression equally, and now with the greater leverage that it has with the Strait of Hormuz. Why do you think, do they have any incentive to back down, especially in the situation that we are at right now?
Well, there is not any incentive for the Iranians, let's say, to renounce. There is only one situation where they have to negotiate. This would be Chinese, Indian, or other Asian countries' pressure on Iran. Please reopen the strait. We need the oil from that region. Look at the oil prices in the last days. And this is the only situation. And I think up till now, the Chinese have done the necessary to work 6-9 months without any delivery from Iran. India is in a more difficult situation. But where is this Indian leverage on the US is as weak as the European leverage insofar. And therefore, I think I can only hope that the Chinese will be the intermediate power to help to come out of this conflict, which is really a non-winning situation for all sides.
Right, and that does bring us to the most difficult question that experts and analysts have been trying the answer to since the very beginning of this conflict. What do you think is the end game for the United States here?
End game. What I fear when I look at this conflict since February till now is the Americans have been really losing their place and their weight in the Middle East. This has been replaced by a new agreement. Let's be tripartite agreement of Mecca between Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan. It's an attempt, let's say, to replace to some extent the American power in the region. Whereas India, it's my question I have to put to you, to Indian politics. Isn't there a real Indian interest, let's say, to become part of this, let's say, agreement for the Middle East? And the Europeans are absent. It's a tragedy. The Russians are on the weak side, yes. But the real power there, if you want, the counter is the position of the Chinese has been, let's say, clearly strengthening over the last 6 months. What I see with a sad eye is the absence of the Europeans, who are not present at all. But really, this is a reshuffle of the power situation in the Middle East. And all this due to, let's say, the fact that Israel has been seducing Trump and his administration, let's say, to attack Iran with a hope which was totally unjustified at the end of the day.
Absolutely, Mr. Bitterlich, but this is still a developing situation. We'll have to wait and see where the situation goes from here on. But for now, thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your perspective with us.
My pleasure as always. Thank you.